The term rabbit holes is almost always associated with conspiracy theories. Oh my goodness. I went down a rabbit hole the other night all about NASA. Do you know what I discovered? What if right? Or I went down a rabbit hole the other night and guess what I learned? Did you know what the pharmaceutical industry is doing? Right? I even started a rabbit hole 5 years ago, which led me to studying deeply the history of the education system in the United States. And so we always think about rabbit holes as being not necessarily a great thing, but what if rabbit holes can be the key to a really deep study of different subjects for children? Hello, my name is Janae Daniels. I'm a wife, a mother of 6, and a former middle school teacher turned independent researcher, homeschooling mom, and educational consultant. Welcome to the School to Homeschool podcast. The rabbit hole is often treated like a distraction in education. In reality, it's frequently where the deepest learning happens. And so that's what we're going to discuss today is the major reasons that we want to embrace this idea of going down rabbit holes, even if it's not for conspiracy theories. Okay, so let's talk about this. Now, the other night, my husband and I were watching The House of David, and I can't remember if it's on Amazon Prime or Netflix, but it's on one of the streaming services. And I thought I knew the Old Testament pretty well, but there was parts of it that I was like, wait a minute, I don't remember this in the Old Testament, which caused us to pause the show that we were watching and then open up our Old Testament and dive into, okay, so let's talk about what actually happened. Did they get this right? Was that artistic license? And ended up helping enrich my understanding of the Old Testament even a little bit better. Now, I don't use it as, like I don't watch Netflix and go, yes, everything that is on a show must be true, right? But what the show did is spurred my curiosity to look things up. Children naturally are full of wonder and they are full of questions. And sometimes as parents, what we do is we dismiss those questions when a child's like they watch a show or they read a book and then they have a question about the book and they're like, Mom, what about this? Or why is this? Or right now we're reading The Year of Miss Agnes, which takes place in Alaska. And my kids had some questions about it. And rather than dismissing the questions, we'll go down a rabbit hole because the rabbit hole might open up some beautiful experiences and more curiosities for our kids. So let's talk about the value of rabbit holes. A rabbit hole is what happens when curiosity takes over. A child studying ancient Egypt suddenly becomes obsessed with mummification. A lesson on birds turns into learning about aerodynamics, migration, weather patterns, and map reading. A child reading about the Titanic sinking becomes researching engineering failures, class systems, radio communication, and oceanography. And in my case, it also made me look up Jekyll Island and the Fed, etc. Traditional schooling often interrupts rabbit holes because the clock says it's time to move on. But the reality is genuine intellectual formation usually happens inside sustained curiosity. So this is why rabbit holes matter. Number 1, children remember what they pursue willingly far longer than what is assigned temporarily. Curiosity activates attention naturally. Instead of forcing motivation externally through grades or rewards or pressure, the subject itself pulls the learner forward. Now, I've talked about motivation before. I've talked about intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation with grades. It's interesting because this is why a child can forget a worksheet for 20 minutes after doing it, but remember obscure facts about trains or sharks or medieval armor, astronomy, the American Revolution, or the genealogy of the Romanov family for years. And I bring up the Romanov family because my daughter was just in Anastasia and we have been studying the Romanovs for the last several months because of it. So rabbit holes can create ownership of learning. When a child is curious and they want to figure out the answer to something, that creates intrinsic motivation for learning. Number 2, rabbit holes build interdisciplinary thinking. Real learning is not naturally divided into subjects. Actually, that was something that was done on purpose so that people would never go into deep learning, but that's a different story altogether, and we can go down the history of the education rabbit hole a different time. For example, you might be watching with your child, and then your child has questions about, well, what is ratatouille? Like, what How do you make it? So then you look up a recipe with a child, or your teenager looks up a recipe of how to make ratatouille, which leads them down the rabbit hole of suddenly they ask questions like, well, what part of France was it developed in? And then they start asking more questions about France. And then suddenly, before you know it, they're studying the French Revolution and asking questions about that, which then leads to them reading A Tale of Two Cities by Charles Dickens, for example. And so they've suddenly started studying history and cooking, chemistry and fractions and budgeting if they decide to make the recipe, nutrition, geography, entrepreneurship. Like, it enables us to see education the way it's meant to be, which is interdisciplinary. So another example, a fascination with the Apollo 11 could lead into a child learning about physics, engineering, Cold War history, political rhetoric, writing, theology, philosophy. Mark Roberg's video on the squirrel obstacle course on YouTube led my kids into studying all different things about physics and different things. And then they wanted to set up their own obstacle course for our dog. Video on squirrels led into all of these different things that my children chose to learn about. Okay, so that's number 2, is that rabbit holes enable us to study things in the interdisciplinary nature of things. Number 3, rabbit holes develop research skills organically. And this is an opportunity for us as parents to discuss what is truth with our children. What are credible sources? What makes a credible source versus something that, well, you saw that on TikTok and it's some guy on TikTok. So what does that have to do with anything? Is this a credible source? Oh, the guy on TikTok is using credible sources. Okay, let's look at those and let's dive into those, right? That enables us as parents to have those meaningful discussions about credibility. Well, you read this study. Okay, who paid for that study? That study was paid for by like a pharmaceutical company or whatever. So how valid should we consider that study? Do you see what I'm saying? It allows us to evaluate sources. It allows us to compare information and talk to the kids about how do we compare information. It allows us to synthesize ideas. It allows us an opportunity to let our children narrate what they're learning and narrate their discovery. So these are higher order thinking skills that many adults never fully develop. But by allowing our children to go down rabbit holes and we go down with them, we can help them develop these skills and develop them ourselves at the same time. Number 4, rabbit holes cultivate endurance and focus. So it's ironic because children often develop longer attention spans when they are allowed to may spend 3 hours building a historical timeline, 6 hours drawing maps, or weeks studying insects. I have mentioned this before. One of my kids is like the poster child for ADHD, and he would become obsessed with certain topics, which as an adult, he still does, except for now as an adult, he studies those topics and then is able to use them in business, which is kind of beautiful. But I remember when he was younger, he became obsessed with magic and magic kits and how to do magic and all of this stuff. And he would spend hours doing it. And his teachers would say, well, he can't focus. And I'm like, wow, that might be true. They can't focus on certain subjects, but by golly, he spent the last 5 hours talking about magic, right? So, and having a top hat and, all the things. And so oftentimes those children that do struggle with focus otherwise, allowing them to pursue some of those rabbit holes, even if it is Minecraft, allows them to cultivate focus and endurance. Oftentimes the issue is not the ability to focus, it's the lack of meaningful engagement. Okay. Number 5, rabbit holes preserve wonder. And I feel like that's something that through the education system gets destroyed very, very young and early on. But the truth is that the wonder is the engine for lifelong learning. Have you ever noticed that many adults stopped asking questions because school trained them to pursue completion instead of fascination? And we tend to put those things behind us that we are fascinated with because we're like, no, I've got to be practical. But that wonder is what leads to beautiful discoveries. So think about the Wright brothers and their fascination with flight, and they went down that rabbit hole, even though they weren't being paid like other people were to study flight. So rabbit holes can protect imagination, initiative, delight, intellectual courage. This is one reason that many homeschoolers notice that their children become more alive intellectually after leaving institutional schooling is because when a child is given the opportunity to pursue rabbit holes, the wonder and the imagination opens up. So, how do we cultivate and inspire using rabbit holes? Well, first, we need to listen, especially for younger children, what questions that they have. Whether it's you're reading a story with the child and they're like, "What about this? What is that?" Rather than dismissing it and being like, we've got to get through this. Take the time and make the time to pause and say, why don't we look that up together? Rather than just giving them the answer, look it up, go down a rabbit hole. Now, the rabbit hole may not go very deep, and that's fine, but allow the time to look it up or say, let's finish this chapter and then let's go look it up. If you're reading a story, or perhaps they're watching a YouTube video and that particular video piques curiosity about something that's happening, and they usually happen in the form of a question. Hey, Mom, why did they use a guillotine during the French Revolution? I just read this, or I saw this, or I was reading the Scarlet Pimpernel. Well, that's a good question. Let's discover why. I don't know why. So let's discover it together. So the key is, as you are going through reading and watching stories or visiting museums, listen for the questions. Watch for the wonder, because those bits and pieces are what takes us down the rabbit hole. So with that, my friends, I hope you take time to go down the rabbit holes, conspiracy theory or not, or if it's just out of curiosity for French cooking. I hope that you take the time to go down rabbit holes with your kids so that they can increase in wonder, so that they can develop the research skills organically, so that they can cultivate endurance and focus, so that they can preserve wonder, so that they can create ownership of learning and build interdisciplinary thinking. That is my hope for you today. Take time to go down the rabbit holes. Mamas and papas, grandmas and grandpas, you are doing so much better than you think you are. You got this. We will talk next week.